All right, welcome everybody. We have a nice group here of 13 people, and maybe still some people joining. So that's a very nice group for a governance call. Thank you and welcome everybody. Also anybody who would be watching this at a later moment. I think we have two, perhaps three items on the agenda. First, I would like to talk about an initiative I would like to propose on governance itself and how it is organized. Tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. Keep the tension on for a little while longer. Another thing which is somewhat related is that Esther will make an announcement on some research work that she is doing, which will also, I think, tie into the things we're doing here in the governance round, but also wider in the future SYNCOM DAO. And the third thing is that I think, Raphael, if you're ready for that, if you're prepared for that, you can tell a little bit more about the preparations of deep funding, which are going well for a deep funding round 3. Not sure if we have a fixed date yet, but we should be starting the submission rather soon. But Raphael will tell you all about that. I have a hard stop today. I have another call after the official time, which usually we run out on that time. So, but today for me, there's no running out. But maybe the rest of you can still continue. But I think it will be. It won't be a video taped because I'm recording it here. So let me think. Maybe Esther, you have limited time. Maybe you would like to kick it off with your announcement or your question.
Sure, great, thank you. With the Supervisory Council, or at the request of the Supervisory Council, I'm exploring a series of ideas to do with something called life logging. David put me onto this concept, which is to do with like collecting all the data from an individual's life, and there are a few kind of relatively notable examples of people kind of putting cameras and things on themselves and logging every piece of data they can from their lives. And we thought it would be interesting to explore this from an organizational perspective. So capturing and synthesizing organizational information to inform better decision making, inform better change management, this kind of thing. So, this is already somewhat taking place in traditional organizations in the form of big data and big data analysis. Some call it organizational memory. So that is really the kind of stored information in the organization's history that can be brought to bear on present decisions. So it's a kind of retrieval system for planning actions on the basis of past experience. So we thought it would be very interesting to see what can be done within SingularityNet and what concepts would be good to bring into practicality for SingularityNet. I would be very curious to know what is already happening in terms of documentation, and what practices for data capture there already are in SingularityNet, and think about what innovations could be brought in to the DAO and to SingularityNet in the wider sense. For example, we have digital cloning available now in the I don't know if it's necessarily the case in SingularityNet, but available as a kind of technology now. We have virtual assistants and digital clones, and we have things like network analysis for Discord, for seeing how people are interacting and what kind of relationships there are. We have voting behavior analysis available in some DAOs, for example. I believe that the RNDAO organization does network analysis and this kind of thing. So I would be very interested to know whether this is applicable within SingularityNet and whether it will be considered useful for the different communities. And to that end, I would find it very, very useful if people would give their input in what they think might be useful to capture in terms of data from our different pieces of the organization and how they could be integrated or analyzed. In order that we can make better decisions and even help present processes like onboarding or governance decisions or things like this. For example, we could produce a really comprehensive onboarding process if we fully were able to articulate all the things in one place that could give a useful history of how this part of the DAO developed or how SingularityNet developed for the person who is being onboarded, or timelines and things like this. With the ambassador program, we are thinking also about a governance experiment framework, which kind of fits into this. So we're thinking about how we would capture the different ways that people are making decisions and how those can be improved and how we would capture that sort of information in order to be used later. So I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts. We have a Sway proposal just to kind of think about these issues and any input and ideas that people have about what could be useful for them in particular, what is already being done to capture and possibly standardize information, and any thoughts that come to mind about what could be helpful for you. End of line.
Thank you. Sorry, you mentioned the Sway area, right, where people can give their input.
I'm just grabbing the link to put it in the chat.
Yeah, okay. I think my topic might benefit from a little bit discussion and feedback, maybe more so than the part that Raphael will have to offer. So I think it's best, Raphael, for you to give a short overview of the things that we're doing for Deep Funding Round 3.
Yes, sure. We have evolved since last week, but first I would love to have your feedback on one situation that I'm trying to solve, but trying to understand what's happening. Any of you here had problems with the link to this call?
Yes, I did originally when I joined. That was the one on the SingularityNet Ambassador account. And so I changed the link in there.
Okay. So potentially is that, yeah. Sorry for this inception here, but I was willing to solve that. Yeah. Thank you, Fly. Okay, guys. So yeah, as I mentioned last week in our call when we are talking about the Deep Funding Round 3, I mentioned that we potentially would launch Round 3 in 2 weeks, which would be the next week. We are still pretty much intending to do that, but of course, as you all understand, we have some resources constraints sometimes that might delay that the perception that we have, but we are doing our best to make it happen, okay? And of course, we are going to have the announcement, the proper announcement in the Discord channel, Telegram, and so on for you to be aware about. Also, what we are doing now, and it's good to have prior to this launching, is the proper documentation, right? Around peer review, the process, also the eligibility review that I'm talking to some of you that participated in the last process, to get not only feedback but also the possibility to make it again, and connecting to the milestone documentation that will give the guide, the rules and guidelines to how do the proper process. Okay, I have to say that we are also very keen to have those that are going to properly do the review. We are very keen to have this selected team being part of this development, developing the documentation along with us, right? Bringing all this democratic, open feature that we are really intending to do. Okay. Okay. For the teams that we contacted for the next week call, the awarded teams will be on Tuesday, and we are also going to touch on the review document, the peer review documentation. Okay. Throughout this process, as I said, we are going to update the website and so on. We are going to have, for eligibility, 2 phases. First phase, it's going to be we are trying to change this denomination here, but it's going to be like a warning process where we are going to mention some points that the proposals are not complying, and the second one, and then giving the time to them to correct, and then the second review will be, and now I'm talking about eligibility, right? Process will be the last one, so it's yes or no to go on. Yeah, and something that I would like to have also better defined, I'm going to talk, Felix, with you and the team, is how we can have what's the best time frame to the town halls to happen, focusing in these proposals and how they are going to be voiced, right, to the community in that sense there. Yeah, so pretty much what we have been doing now is the documentation and focusing on calls with the selected teams for the reviews, because it's going to be a very interesting process where we are going to connect efforts from the community into the proper process and growing, right? One topic that I would like to we can already say is that on the eligibility review, I'm not sure if you remember, we had a budget criteria, we had milestone criteria, pool allocation, pool conditions, and the hosting and API calls if they were all in the proposal, right? We are adding one more criteria to this eligibility process, which is the resourcing requested or required from the deep funding team or the SingularityNet Foundation as well, or the ecosystem. We are willing to have a process where to be eligible, the teams and proposals, they should contact the team, the internal team before, and get the assessment and evaluation about the using resources, right? It's not something that we are willing to not provide. It's just because sometimes we end up making more difficult to the teams to achieve milestones when we are involved, so much involved, and we don't have the resources. So it's about communicating and trying to make a better proposal while using the resources. Okay, that's differentiation. Yeah, and yeah, so that's the ongoing work that we are talking. Of course, that points as the one I mentioned at the deep funding resources eligibility. We are discussing, we are doing the proper documentation, so we can have some still some tweaks or minor changes into it. Okay, it's not something that is still written in stone. I believe it's hard to say that something in this deep funding program, I don't believe it should be written in stone, because we really much foster this participation and refreshing everything. But it was just to mention that the things we discuss here, while they are not properly advertised in the website, in our portal, there are possibilities to be changed. Okay, just a remark I wanted to make with this type of information that I pass. It's more on the transparency part. Okay, Jan, did I miss something that you would like to cover?
I can take over here if you would like. Thank you. So basically what we're doing, we're taking the process that we started in round 2 as an experiment, and we're now improving on them. Both the eligibility review, add milestones to that, peer review with more people, hopefully also more coverage. So we're building and continuing on what we started and what was successful already. Also, I was just mentioning before, the stable period was in the previous rounds 2 weeks, and we will make it 3 weeks now, because there's so much to do. It's actually for us the most busy time, because we do the eligibility reviews, we do the peer reviews, we have to write comments on that. There are the town halls where people can present themselves, all preparations that will make the voting process better, hopefully. So that is going to be a week longer. Maybe also a little note on the tooling side. Last time we had a quite extensive session on platforms. So I announced that we are working on our own submission flow on WordPress, on the WordPress platform that we are already building and building out. And also commenting so that we, for that part, are not reliant on Sway anymore, because we believe that we need some very specific things there that currently Sway is not able to offer. However, the last time I asked you for your opinion and whether you would like to wait until this next great tool is finished and wait with round 3 until that's done, or have a round in parallel in Sway still, while we are working on our WordPress base tool and completing and refining that. And yeah, because there was a very clear consensus in the room that I was at that moment talking to, and also other voices had no objections, we will go one more time with Sway. And a benefit of that is also that the contribution tool that is being built is also being built based on the output of Sway. Now it should get some flexibility in the future, that it can consume many different kinds of output and input. But that means that we will also be using that contribution calculation tool in round 3, which will maybe make our lives already a little bit easier. We might want to change the calculation algorithm a little bit, because in the previous round we also gave a small reward just for voting if you are above a certain threshold on contribution score. We might not be able to have that part in this round, not to overcomplicate it, and so that we can really give this tool a test round, and so that we can also use the output of the tool to create the reward calculation and actually pay it. Details, technical details, as Rafael said, we will draft a new version of the conditions, etc., and write a blog on all the changes, which are not that many in this round compared to previous round, but we'll write a blog on whatever small things will be changed. So that rounds up that part. Oh, one more thing on Sway. We will continue to use Sway for other topics like governance topics. So that's why Esther is also asking feedback on her initiative on Sway. So that will continue also after round 3. At least there's no reason for us right now to deviate from that. And I suppose we will also be using that tool in the coming period when we will be working on SYNCOM-DAO. Now, SYNCOM-DAO has been announced, election of the Supervisory Council has been announced, but it's not yet put in action. There are some delays there, but it's just a delay because we need to sort out some legal topics and have some involvement of people and make sure that everybody agrees to the final text. From what I can see now, we should be good. I don't think there are any fundamental changes in the approach that we are taking, at least not from a community perspective and an approach perspective, maybe a little bit from a legal perspective. So it will be just as fantastic as we aimed it to be, maybe even a little bit better than we defined it before. Can't say too much about it, not any more than that, but I hope we can give more details pretty soon. But no, it's still coming. We're determined and hope we can give more information pretty soon. All right, then for the last topic of this evening, and we still have a full hour on that, so that's a luxury. Community governance and how we are doing these calls and how the relation between, let's say, the internal and external stakeholders takes place. So we have a deep funding staff, if you like, which is Rafael, me, and Esther is also supporting us. And of course, there's also Arslan who's working on the WordPress side, but that's more in the background. And there's you, the community. And right now we have 16 people in the call. I don't remember how many people were here the last time. I think it was a little bit less at that time, a little bit fewer people, but we see different faces in different calls. So that is one thing. Another thing is that we experimented very lightweight with some decision making in the governance group. So within a poll that had that had some downsides. Last time, I think it was not the previous, but the one before, there were the outcomes of the governance round. The result of that is that we decided not to do a vote, and we explored some topics there. But actually also there, the one topic that was actually ready for a vote, we couldn't get consensus on. And I think part of the reason for that is that in order to make a decision, or in order to give good advice on a decision, it's important to have also sufficiently in-depth information. And I've heard some people telling me, and maybe that's something that I'm underestimating sometimes, like, yeah, Jan, you work on this all day, which is not quite true, but partly true. You're in depth in all these topics, and in a lot of cases, you created a lot of these outlines. So I'm better informed on a lot of these topics than most of you are. And I believe that if I put forward a certain topic, that this 1.5 hours that we have together every 2 weeks is not always sufficient to cover the topics in the depth that they sometimes deserve. I mean, some topics are easier than others. And if we are going drilling down on a topic and I ask advice, or we'll even do a vote or whatever, I also noticed, that was the case in the poll, but also maybe in the last round or the previous one, that the outcome of any feedback that I'm getting is very much dependent on the exact wording and the exact way that it is being presented. So the topic at the end of the governance round, the topic that I would like to have some consensus on, I think at that time I assumed that the people in the call had all read and memorized the topic sufficiently in order to make immediate good decision on that. And I think in hindsight, maybe some people were not quite prepared for that, hadn't given it enough thought, and maybe I didn't explain it well enough. Now, at that time, at that call, that specific thing, it was about value and the added value of proposals. The consensus, so we did a kind of poll-like thing, and the consensus was that the votes were right spread out. It was 2-3, and actually the option that I liked best got 3, but I thought it wouldn't be appropriate with that distribution to force it. I also know that if I would have, or I think if I would have told people in the call, listen guys, I'll explain it one more time, and by the way, my preference is X, then probably I would have been able to manipulate it or force it or push it or nudge it in a way to get the outcome that I would prefer. But that's not the way that I think things should work. It can't be that if I'm disappointed by any outcome, then I'll just try it again, just as long as I get the outcome that I want, right? That's not the way things work. So this is a long story, a long context, but the idea that I've been playing around with a bit, and I would like to get your feedback on, is what I would like to do is create a focus group for governance. Meaning, I'm thinking right now of having 5 people in that group and try with these 5 people to have a bit closer connection. So maybe have weekly calls, but I would also expect these people to be a sounding board, really, a sparring partner that we can involve in a lot of things that we are thinking about. And not just in these calls, whether they're weekly or bi-weekly, but perhaps also on our messaging tool. We are currently on Slack, but we're thinking about moving to Mattermost, which would allow a wider set of people to join. That's a different story. So the way that I am thinking about this right now is to have these 5 people, and we can talk about a little bit on how these people would be selected. And then perhaps this group of 5 people could in turn have closer relationships with the community and mediate between us and the community and translate and get the opinion of the community. So I can imagine, for instance, that this group would have maybe not bi-weekly, but monthly calls with the community, or do whatever they think makes most sense. And then give reports. Well, these are all the things that we discussed. These are the things that we advised on. I don't see this as a deciding group. Maybe it will evolve into that over time. But at this moment, it would just be a consulting matter, which is extremely important. Like 2 weeks ago, I asked you just advice on the deep funding round. I really didn't have a clear preference. And the result of that is that we're now doing the next round very soon on Sway. So advice, even if it's not decision power, really counts and gives influence. So it's like a two-tier system. One other reason why I'm doing this now, to be honest, is I expected we would have been farther progressed at this time with the election of the new supervisory council and with the process of SYNCOM-DAO, etc. And I hoped that we could also, or I could also have some new different relationship with the newly elected council that way. But because that is a little bit longer, basically I'm getting too impatient. I don't want to wait anymore. And yeah, I would like to continue improving our own processes in deep funding. And actually, I believe it will also tie very well into whatever we will do with SYNCOM-DAO in the process before SYNCOM-DAO and after that. So I think we're on a good trajectory. I think this is a good process. I also have some ideas how this might evolve in the future. But yeah, you could consider this a start. So I'll keep quiet for a moment. I've been talking too long already, probably. I hope there's still some people here and not asleep. First feedback, anybody would like to add something? Grace.
I have a question because I get your impatience and I get the idea and I get the, and this, it's really important and admirable emphasis on getting more closer to and more feedback from the community. Like this is like the constant mantra that you have going. And I would like to understand a little bit better what specifically you're dissatisfied with. Like, is it not enough time? Is it not enough people? Is it, like what specifically might it look like? Or maybe a specific example of like, when I did this, I felt like nobody got engaged, or like, because when you want more of something, then it's like, okay, what's the thing that's missing, and can we get more specific about it?
I can be very specific on this. I wanted to walk around this a little bit because, yeah, for me it's past, but I'll get very specific because you're asking. I was a little bit frustrated with a call we had 4 weeks ago. We had a governance round. At the end of the governance round, we decide of all the topics that are being put forward, which topics deserve a vote from the community. We did, and we had 2 buckets of them. One bucket, which was actually only one proposal from the internal people, if you want to call it that, and other from the rest of the community. So the community is completely free, bring forward their own proposals, filter them down, and have the community vote on it. We figured in that call that most of the topics proposed from community side weren't at the stage where we can just ask a vote. Some of them are really complex and may take time, and we need to do a deeper dive to have proper options there before we can ask the community to vote on it. There was one topic which we actually did agree on, but there were some technical issues. It was about rewards, and we figured that the one thing that we wanted we couldn't implement because we couldn't enforce it, so it wouldn't make sense to implement it. And there was one thing that personally I was really attached to, that I thought was really important, which was about ensuring that projects that get a lot of funding are not just nice projects in themselves, but actually add value to the platform. So sometimes a project asks a lot of money to do some kind of front-end application or whatever, and then 5% of the budget is a service on the platform. So there were three options there. One option was, let's keep it as it is, but require the teams that they will specify which part of their budget is actually going to something that will help the platform and which is the front-end solution, which might also help the platform if it consumes a lot of API calls. So both are valid in themselves. The second option was, let's do that, but let's also require the teams that they will start with the service, because my fear is that they will spend $95,000 on a nice solution. And then in the last milestone, when they have to do the service, they say, well, we thought about it, but it's not feasible, or we can't do it, or we don't want to do it. And then we have paid almost $100,000 for a solution that doesn't bring any value to the platform. And the third option was the most groundbreaking one, saying, well, we need to split these things up. Either you build a service on the platform, or you build a consuming thing, and then at least the community knows what they're voting for. Both things can be valid, once more. And I was very disappointed that, well, the first thing I asked, is there anybody in the room, and there were just 10 people or so, I don't know, less, that thinks that all of these things are not appropriate, that we should just leave it as it is. And to my big surprise, there were actually people who said, well, it's better not to ask these teams anything, but just to leave it as it is. And there were three that were actually for the second, the middle option, which would have been satisfactory to me. So I could have said at that moment, okay, 3, it's a majority, done. But I thought there are two people that say we won't do anything. There are 2 people that say, well, only ask them to split the fee, and there are 3 people. So it was a kind of shortcut. It was a kind of shortcut because I was going to have this for a community vote, but we decided not to go for a community vote because we only had one topic, and I thought it isn't a good thing to arrange a whole voting event just about this one topic. My assumption was we'll have an easy consensus about this in this group, and then we can move on. So I asked advice. I didn't ask for a decision, but I asked advice. So I'm still not sure how we will cover this in the future. And I was a little bit disappointed in the outcome. So I felt stuck at that moment. So that is one example. I'll give you one more. Once we started with a poll where we tried to do some decision making in the governance rounds, and it was just based on a poll. And then the first time we did the poll, I don't remember the exact topic anymore. There was a certain outcome. And then some people were surprised, and we talked about it, and then somebody says, let's do it again. And this person asked everybody in a little bit in the way like, okay, we have this is the question, we have these 2 options, and personally I think option A is quite good. But Grace, what do you think? And then Raphael, what do you think? And William, Bill, what do you think? And surprise, we got a different outcome in that way of doing things. So what that taught me is the exact way that you put something forward determines the outcome of that. What it also taught me is that in that meeting, that for me was crucial, maybe there were only 6, no, I think there were 7 people or something, while that was a really important meeting. And maybe some people maybe the next meeting there were 10 or 15 like here, but different faces. So what I would like to accomplish here with this focus group is to have a few people that are more on top of the whole concept that we're doing, of everything, have more in-depth knowledge that we can have more in-depth discussions with and dialogues with, and based on that can give a more grounded advice and use that knowledge that they get to inform the community in an unbiased way. So yeah, does that answer your question? It's quite a long answer, I think.
No, it's very good. Like, it's very, very helpful. And sorry about the background noise. To me, this points to a couple of things. And of course, an anonymous voting where, you know, where people don't have to say in public what they think is very different. And then going around in a circle one by one and choosing who to say ask first, you know, knowing who influences who, like really different. And even hand raising, really different. I mean, if you've ever seen 12 Angry Men, that's what it's about. It's like there's always some people who are waiting to see what Felix says. And then when Felix raises his hand, they raise their hand because everybody wants to kiss Felix's ass.
I want to add here that maybe
you know, whatever it is, right? but we all know that if it's public, it's really different.
I'd like to add here that I might have exaggerated a little bit to show what was going on, and the person
but I get it.
was a very well respected person that is a very important and unbiased person, I would say. So. But it's more about as an example on the kind.
No, I got the point, which was like all of a sudden you realize, and then there's also all kinds of studies that if you know, depending on the order of the options in the list, people vote differently. I mean, it's so ridiculous. I mean, there's this whole they have this thing about why it is that there's really different organ donation percentages in Austria and Germany. So yeah, some people are nodding, they know this one. And it's like whether you have to check to opt in or check to opt out, you get completely different. So these are all reasons why I'm not big on voting and why you're saying focus groups are going to be better. But that's not what I'm going to say right now. What I'm going to say right now is what I think that you're pointing at is a little bit more confusing than that, which is this word community. Like the word community is kind of thrown around, and it seems to me that just the requirements to be a community member are joining the Discord channel, right? And that could be anybody. It could be somebody who's aligned with your values, somebody who's not aligned with your values, somebody who understands AI, somebody who's completely afraid and paranoid of AI. It could be somebody who's just trying to, like that whole idea of community. And one of the things is that when you're providing funding, which is the example you gave, right? We've got a funding DAO. A lot of the people who are in your community are there to get money out. And they might not be the best AI people in the world because OpenAI just snapped them all up with salaries that you guys can't compete with, and that they don't have to bid for and beg for and whatever, right? So we've got a bunch of, and this is an exaggeration, it's not the truth, right? Because they're going to be also freedom fighters. They're going to be people who are like, I would never work for Microsoft, and they might come here, right? So it's not that they're all mediocre, but some of, you know, you've got some people who might be mediocre, who are hoping to get some money because they couldn't even get hired as I mean, if you can't get hired as an AI developer today, dude, like you're not even mediocre. I mean, everybody's snapping up AI engineers, right? So it's like, who is the community? And what I just said is kind of an extreme potentiality, but in potentiality, your community members are mediocre minus AI people hoping to get, and I mean, I don't know any of you guys here, and I can't assess anybody's programming abilities. So I'm not talking about anybody in the room. I'm just talking about a whole bunch of anonymous people who aren't here right now. But
you're insulting everybody.
Right? They could be, the potentiality is that your community is made up with people who have the exact opposite interest of you. There is potential for that because there's no screening mechanism. And then it doesn't matter what your focus group is. It matters what the screening criteria are for considering someone to be a representative community member or a community member. And then you can say, well, I don't care about that because I'm going to create I'm going to create a focus group only of the people who I know really should be in my community. And then the question is, well, why don't you just ditch all the other ones? Anyway, so you get the idea. There's a membership question because before you poll people or give them the vote, it's like, who's a member? Who is a member of a community? That's before everything.
You're absolutely right, Grace. Thank you. Rojo has his hand up, but please allow me first. So what I always say about this governance structure in deep funding and in general, I have sort of clear idea how things could work 2 years from now. I know where we are today. And to get from here to there, that is the hardest part, because it's a balance. You have to give a little bit of influence away, but not too much. And so how I see this in the future, we have put a lot of value in contribution tool, which will actually look at hopefully a lot of different metrics, like not just token holding, but maybe also wallet voting behavior, but also being in meetings like this, also being engaged on our portal, and whatever else we think is important and we can measure in a quantitative way, we can add to that tool. And based on that, we can, with that contribution score, we should be able to do a lot of things. We can make certain comments float up more to the surface. We can add voting weights to people. We can also define who should be in certain groups, who should have certain roles in the organization. And we could even, it doesn't always have to be the people with the highest contribution score have the highest, have the most possibilities. But I can imagine that, suppose as an example, this focus group, that you will say, well, if we have 5 people, we want to have 3 people that have at least this amount of score or whatever. But we also want to have 2 people with a low score, or that are just new or whatever. But at least with that score, you have all kinds of possibilities to tweak and to nudge and to experiment, to keep a good balance in the organization, a balance between the senior voices who've been here all the time, and the new people, and people that hold tokens, and people that would like to get grants, and people who are just enthusiastic, etc. So I can see a future for that, but we're not there today. So the question is how to get there.
I think you're in a more dangerous place today.
Yeah.
Right? You're at the initial stage of who is going to decide that initial thing, and garbage in, garbage out. So, setting those criteria of who should be a member is top, because if you've got the best reputation of a bunch of mediocre people, it doesn't mean you're great. Yeah. It's just, so like, it's still the same problem.
Yeah.
Anyway,
you're right. But at the same time, we want to start the decentralization process. So it would be safer to keep everything central. But then again, maybe that's also not the best idea. So we're treading lightly here. It's a balancing act. And so I tried a little bit with decision making in the governance round, and now I'm trying it a little bit different and making sure that we don't get off the road. So the most dangerous thing to do would be, or the most risky, it might turn out great, but it's risky, would be to have the community decide on the treasury of the whole SingularityNet Foundation, which is what we ultimately want to the community to be capable of. So one of the things for SingComm DAO is that instead of doing that over the whole organization, the idea is to start with a smaller part where we can experiment and mature and then roll that out over the rest of the organization. And what I'm doing now in Deep Funding is doing that on an even smaller scale and experimenting. But we do learn. We do learn from all these experiments that we're having. And by the way, I don't know what the ideal community member is. Well, I do. There isn't, because we need all kinds of people. We don't need maybe we don't even need AI experts, or not a lot in our community. We do need engaged people. We do need regular people who are confronted with AI in their life, want to have some opinion. So we want to have maybe people with a legal background, and maybe people with an ethical or philosophical background or sociological background. So yeah, whether they have a high level of AI or not is not the most important thing, actually, I think. Right now, I think the best measure would be people that are engaged because they are also informed, and they care, apparently. Some care maybe just because they want to have a grant, but I'm pretty sure that's not the case, or not, at least not the only thing for everybody. Maybe this is a good moment to let also some other people speak, in the sense of decentralization and community engagement. Rojo.
I wanted to thank Grace for her insight. And I also wanted to get into that and kind of like go deep into what she discussed. So she said perhaps like forming this group might be just the best of mediocres, which is, I understand the case, but I would like to get into that more. So mathematically, okay, let's assume this group is going to be a bunch of mediocre, right? And let's assume their insight is worth nothing. Then we still have this sieve, which is the foundation, right? And I would like to assume that there isn't a bunch of mediocre people in the foundation. There should be some experts, people who have some good insights. That's one. If actually there is a bunch of mediocres, their insights is probably going to be mediocre, which means like probably these people from the foundation are not going to take that as actionable insight. And mediocre people usually tend to not influence many people because people don't look up to them. So therefore, not taking their point of view as an actionable item would not really change anything. They wouldn't like change much in the community. And yeah, I know I'm going down into the rabbit hole, but I would like to really get into that and like kind of go through the idea. And then like at the end, you realize like whatever group you're going to get into that focus group and whatever insight comes out of it is always good. Because the worst case scenario is that you get a mediocre thing and then you don't apply it and then nothing is going to happen. And then you just go with like 0, but it's never going to be negative. So yeah, that's basically my insight.
Maybe we can go right through to Mauro. Maybe you have something to add to this, Mauro.
No, sorry. It was super interesting, the idea of the focus group, because sometimes the communication area with the community is when it fails, and with the focus group you can see a genuine reaction and how to improve or change the speech regarding to how to have a great impact in that solution with the community. So I think that is a super cool idea that will be a great solution in the future, and will be important to have a diversity of opinions in that group to see and how everyone can react and cover all the spectrum. So it was only that insight.
Thank you. Esther.
Yes, I was just thinking about the vote that you were talking about. This is much more on a kind of technical level, but I just wondered whether the vote that you took, was it a 3 options or 4 options and you have to pick one, and you can't pick any others if you pick the one?
In this specific example, which is just an example in the end, right? It was more like a trigger for me to think, okay, now I have to change something because this isn't working anymore and we need to move on, and there isn't yet another structure in place that I can rely on. So let's create that structure for ourselves. But we had like 3 options. And the first question that I asked about that, is there anybody, which I forgot to add, I suppose, is there anybody who wouldn't like any of these options? So it would be 4 options in the end.
Okay. No, I was just wondering whether there was a possibility to say, well, I prefer this one, but I could live with one of the others, which might, you know, I take your point that this is a trigger for something else. I was just curious about the setup of the boat and.
Yeah. So that's an interesting thought, right? So a whole different way of going with this by consensus, or by consent, I should say, which is in that circle. What is it? Holacracy or something?
Sociocracy.
Sorry?
Sociocracy.
Sociocracy. I think there the idea is that that anybody can propose something, and if you're not specifically against it, then it will be approved. Only if somebody is really against it and can make a good case, then a conversation will be. But in the end, of the whole room, nobody should be completely against it. So everybody should give their consent. So that would be different. But in this case, we had not one proposal, but we actually had 3 different variations of that proposal. So that consent thing wouldn't quite work. But yeah, I think we can fine tune. But like Grace is saying, there are so many nuances there. And everybody who makes surveys knows that, and who does these kind of research knows that the way you ask a question, you can ask the same question in 1,000 different ways, and it will definitely influence the outcome. So doing this offhand spontaneously in a call, you can do it, but it would require some kind of intimate knowledge and a good understanding beyond the exact text of this poll. And I think we can have a better situation if we have a smaller, closer group. Rojo, there's something else you would like to?
I also wanted to share one experience I had. So I'm working on the video workgroup in the ambassador program, and one thing we do is we vote for every single thing in the workgroup. So whether it's funding a video or like making any decision, we do vote for it. And I kind of, played a bit with multiple ways of doing voting. And what I found that works best is, and I'm not going to talk about the form of the vote and the questions, because the formulation, as you said, is quite its own problem, and it's quite a formidable problem. But what I found about timing is that when I give people a week, like from one meeting to another, and it's an open vote for 1 week, I tend to get more participation and then more insight from people talking about the thing they're voting for, which is quite interesting. I don't know if that could be probably an option.
Yeah, thank you. So one more feedback on your previous remark on mediocre people. I don't consider myself to be very special, so I'm in good company there, I suppose. But I think everybody has a voice, and everybody has a unique perspective on things. And the fact that you're here already shows that you have some interest. It's different than picking a random person off the street and trying to inform him about or her about deep funding. So your caring, and engaged. And I think that already makes everybody who's here tonight, for example, above average applicable for such a position. About voting and the process, yeah, I think we will have to mature in that, and I think we'll have multi-layered voting, and with contribution scores we can maybe have a smaller representative groups vote on small things, and have a bigger group vote on bigger things, and that was my idea originally in how we could make use of a body like the Supervisory Council, but it would be more like a representative body than a Supervisory Council that could, for smaller decisions, give their feedback and approve. And once they say, well, this is too big or too risky or whatever, then propose to have a community vote. And yeah, I think there we can also have layers, but you will grow into that, and there are a lot of options, but that's all part of where we want to go. And yeah, if you have a small group and you have a small group of stakeholders and you want to have a decision on only the things that are only relevant for that small group, that's of course a very different situation than if you have a small group that is supposed to make decisions that are relevant for a very big group. And especially if this small group is self-assigned and spontaneously, organically grown, and might change from session to session. I see a lot of hands. I'm talking too much. I should let you guys talk more. I have 20 minutes left and then I have to leave, by the way. So the last minute or so, I'll cut off whoever is talking, because I think I'm recording it on my computer. Might not have been the best choice in hindsight, but then we'll have to stop the recording. So Curtis, what's on your mind?
Thanks, Jan. To what Rojo was saying, we've in our organization, we've designed a little bit of a 3-session workshop around voting. And of course, there's the proposals themselves, which are solutions, but then similar to what Catalyst is doing with challenge settings, is there needs to be a series of consensus or discussions around what needs to be addressed, which is what we're doing here now. But having a meeting, identifying the scope of what we're trying to resolve, and that's typically done from the initiative, the proposer, or the person who has the thought and the idea. They propose their concepts, their understanding, their perspective, and then provide maybe some resources to support that perspective, maybe some research material. That's kind of one meeting where you arrive at a general consensus of understanding. The second one is to actually discuss some of the research that was done and the supporting evidence and direction that the group wants to take. And then the third is discussing the actual solutions themselves. I don't know if that's beneficial or relative here, but it is a bit of context orientation, then discussion, since we're all on the same level playing field, and then deciding on a solution.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely something we can grow into. Don't think we're at that stage yet. We're a very small team with very small community also, actually, that needs to make a lot of decisions. So if we would go through that process each time, the rate of improving and extending deep funding would go down massively at this stage. To give one example on your first point, the person who created the proposal should present it. In many cases, this person wasn't in the call. So there you go. So that is one of the things I would like to avoid. There's one other example I would like to have a closer, more involved and deeply informed group then. Guillermo.
Hi there. So again, one more time of a very interesting discussion. As a Caucasian Latin mediocre, in a room full of colors, it's always useful to have a guideline, a rule book that sets a voting process, at least boundaries or limits or, I don't know, rules. I always repeat this, rules of engagement. And it's good always to have, as Rojo and Kevin or Curtis were mentioning, it's always to rely on personal experiences, because you have that already experiment with something, and you have some insights that probably are useful for the common goal. We, as a renewable energy social business, turn into a DAO. But before opening voting process for the community, the user generators to come as you envision the second DAO, the community to make the decisions, first we set up rules, fundamentals, which are the directions the DAO will dig in to try to bring sustainable social development in Latam, our region. So, and when you see a lot of DAO experiments, because we're all experimenting for the moment, you see a lot of fails because always the outcome of a voting experience, it's you need to deal with the outcome, and that's so to avoid regretments at the end. So, for us, have been working to set up the universe we want to develop, and then freedom is a simple matter. You know, it's like a melody, like a improvisation on some bars. You know, you need to. If not, it's just noise. I remember exactly the moment on the voting process that you put as an example, and the frustration that you bring, because it's we were all like, we're not going to have a decision at the end. We discussed for 2 hours and 45 minutes that day, and it was there's no decision. But at the end, it proves something that we need to set up. I think what the guys are mentioning, you need to, if you open up time process for the voting, you open the door for different variables. Gaming, because there are always interests behind voting process. So there's always need to have a balance, but as the objective of the community and the Singularity Net and the CircumDAO as fundamentals, these make rules and limit all these variables. At the end, the result, of course, each option and how it's the narrative and how it's presented will make the case. But at the end is the environment where these are presented. I'm sorry for that. Going too long.
Don't be sorry. Thank you. Yeah. So I would say will develop a better framework, a more intricate framework, and something that we can work towards step by step to having also in the context of CincoMDAO. And yeah, it's experimenting, and sometimes you don't get what you want, and I accepted that. But that doesn't mean that we can't improve from that point on. So yeah, I see a big role for this focus group. Not a decision-making role, maybe in the future, but not today. Yeah, in respect of time, Ubio, you have your hand up. I'm very interested to hear your opinion on this.
All right. Okay. So, kind of, I can remember. I think Guillermo was in that meeting. I was in the meeting. I think Felix was also in that meeting. and a couple of others were also there. And I was one of the people that actually voted against us. I think there was an option, and the option was not necessarily about against. It was about saying that maybe we are not too convinced or something. There was an option like that, which is what I and Felix went for, and a couple of others as well. Now, I want to say something that speaks to all of this conversation. So for me, I really do understand why and the essence of the focus group. And when I was voting for us to take a pause, it was not necessarily because I didn't buy your idea or I didn't see the point, but I wanted to be convinced that this is not another centralization that we're trying to create, because the essence of a DAO is supposed to be decentralized. So for every time I'm trying to see something that looks as if we are trying to create a box of centralization, I try to dig deeper in my mind to be able to understand that it doesn't feel and doesn't seem the way I am trying to see it. So that's the first level. The second level to it was I wanted to be sure that we are not trying to run away from the hard process that comes with decentralization just because it doesn't suit our narrative and because it feels a little bit slow, which is the problem with decentralization. Sometimes, so the concept with decentralization as a governance model is not necessarily that we're going to get fast results, but we are going to get the best output. That is the concept. And so I was trying to be sure that I was trying to get you to convince me, and that's why we're like, oh, can we have this meeting again? And can we have more discussions around this? Because I wanted to be sure that we are not trying to run away from the hard process of decentralization, which comes with the kind of decisions and the process of decision making, which actually sometimes makes it to look very dull and very slow, but most times it's always the optimum, right? So of course, now I think now I'm getting some perspective when you talk about, oh, this is not a decision making group. This is just an advisory group. We are here to see how do we present the issue in a much better way and all of that. I think this is much more soothing than what I heard in the last time. So that's why we're like, I'm not against the idea, but I want to have more conversation. So sometimes so the problem is not necessarily about for and against, and that is where democratic processes always has put our mind. So sometimes I can vote against an idea that I do agree with, not necessarily because I'm against the idea, but because I just want much more conviction, or I just want to go through the process much well to be vested enough to say a yes to it. So that's just the point I wanted to contribute there.
Thank you for saying that and for clarifying that. I want to make clear here that I respect everybody, also in that meeting and whatever choice you made. And I also know from you and also the other person who voted against it why, and also for the best reasons. But it's a very good clarification that, you know, the output of a vote is somehow binary, or 3 options or whatever. While the reasoning behind the outcome is much more interesting. So having a conversation on why you voted something will give me much more information than just having the vote itself. So yeah, I think that reinforces my idea of having this focus group to have these in-depth discussion. By the way, I'm not looking for a group that is just saying, yes, Jan, I agree, Jan. I'm really looking for constructive but open-minded thinkers who can give different perspectives. So even if it would be just a regular mediocre person from the street, there's already benefit from having somebody from the outside giving feedback to something that we may have been thinking about a long time already. So one more comment on that. Fast. We are going for the best thing, even if it takes a lot of time. Two things. First of all, I outlined it before. The way that I see the process is that you have an experimenting phase, a consolidating phase, and a governance phase. And in this experimenting phase, you need to be fast in changing, because that's the way you learn most in the shortest time. And that enables you later to grow quicker. And then at some point, when you get at the stage that you're thinking you're at an equilibrium, you have a good solution, you consolidate it. And then after that, you can really govern it with appropriate democratic processes. But we are at a time frame in the world and in AI that a lot is happening, and we don't do decentralization just because we fancy it's an interesting thing. It's because we think it's really important. It's really important that we are decentralized in such a way that we can keep this environment open and accessible for everybody, and that it won't be taken by a government or a company or whatever. So it's a necessity. And unfortunately, it looks like that we may not have the luxury of a lot of time here. Things might be different a year, 2 years, or 3 years from now than they are today. So there is a sense of urgency. So that is why we're doing SynComDAO. And that is why we want to speed up this process. And maybe as part of that process, this first stage, we need to do a few things a little bit more centralized in order to, at the second stage, be faster in more decentralization. I hope it doesn't sound too lame, but that's the situation we're looking at. We have 4 minutes left, at least I have 4 minutes left. I think you can still continue in the call, even if it's not recorded. One topic we didn't really address, so the discussion really moved towards voting. And the question also, like Grace said, but also like Ubio said, voting may not always be the best tool we have to get at the consensus or to get at the best possible decision. And so that's one thing of the exploration. But the other thing is, the starting point was we want to form that focus group. We're thinking about 5 people. It's not completely crystallized in my mind how we will select these 5 people. But one way of doing this would be to create a forum, to mention the responsibilities, to ask people, what would you like or would you not like to do? And maybe have a short, like 2-3 bullets information of why you think you are best suited for that, for such a role. By the way, the hours, we will estimate the hours that are related to that, and we will give a compensation for those hours. In most areas in the world, it won't make you rich, but it's a compensation. I think similar compensation in time that Ambassador Program is giving, and that we did for the eligibility review, for instance. So I think at this stage, it could be a kind of application process. And then maybe in the future, we could have a vote on that, but or go there gradually. 2 minutes, talk fast, Felix.
There wouldn't be much rewards, right? I think you also have the social incentives. Do you plan to link it to, let's say, what you experiment already on deep funding with the reputation system and the weights there?
Probably we want to have as much metrics in the reputation system as possible, but we also make sure that it won't outshine every other metric, because you're every week and very closely. So we'll have to tweak that a little bit, but for sure it will give you reputation, because it's important. You are a reputed person and you have a lot of knowledge and engagement if you would be in that focus group. Serge.
I cannot say much in 1 minute, but okay, just one thought. It's the VC model, right? They invest, they 9 out of 10 startups will die, but they still invest because one of them can return the whole fund. And so here the same thing, right? You might make some mistakes, but if something is good for Singularity Net, if one of them, then it's net positive, right? So
you're talking about experiments and all the things that we're doing and the things that will.
Yeah, the DAO voting is a challenging problem, not just with your project, like with every project, right? And if you figure it out, you will be able to help other projects as well with the voting. So it's a good thing.
Yeah, we definitely want to do that. We have high hopes. I see a lot of building blocks. I see building blocks in the ambassador groups, see building blocks in the contribution score and all our ideas on what we used to call reputation rating. I see a lot of potential, what Esther is doing right now with her initiative, the meetings we have today. So I think we're on a good trajectory, really. So yeah, on that note, thanks so much for being here. Feel free to continue the discussion on Discord or on Telegram. If you have ideas, specific ideas on how you would like us to create that group of 5 people, let me know. Maybe it will inspire us to some alternative approach. But thanks for this discussion. It was very fulfilling and valuable to me.